Yes, hello everyone. My name is Nina Reiners. I'm associate professor at the University of Oslo, and I'm happy to present you this article, The Power of Interpersonal Relationships, a Socio-Legal Approach to International Institutions and Human Rights Advocacy, that you can find now here at the Review of International Studies. And this article presents, a long-standing interest of mine in access and agency when it comes to shaping the development of international law. And in particular, for this article, I'm interested in explaining why we can find some human rights advocates being more successful than others when it comes to influencing the development of international human rights. The main argument of this article is that the relationships between individuals help explain the success of human rights advocacy in international institutions. I'm, of course, not the first one to make this argument about individuals, the power of individuals and the power of interpersonal relations. But I still think we still have difficulties in researching this, analyzing this. And therefore, this article introduces an analytical framework for studying interpersonal relationships in human rights advocacy, and applies it to 3 cases of human rights development that had been very closely together. And these processes all took place in the same international institution, namely an expert body, the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And by applying a social legal lens, I emphasize, of course, the politics of the legal complex, and acknowledge the effects on formal properties of law. And through this social legal approach, I shift the perspective to the individual level and people's biographies to understand successful norm advocacy in international law in international institutions. And yes, so you will find the framework, and you will find the framework applied to these 3 cases that took place between 1992 and 2002, where the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights adopted 3 treaty interpretations on food, health, and water. And in terms of data, when you read the article, you will find a variety of sources, meeting minutes. I also used archival materials. The biographical analysis include CVs first and foremost, but also personal and professional websites, interview material. And with that, I can trace individual backgrounds and common trajectories of people to then explain advocacy success. Overall, my findings will reaffirm a need to really zoom in and place emphasis on relations, either forged ones or pre-existing ones, that for one enable cooperation between advocacy actors on the one side and international institutions on the other, but also ultimately to really explain success in advocacy. So what you can see here is this framework that I developed over time to account for difficulties in the research process when analyzing interpersonal relationships. I suggest a 3-step framework. The first one is a mapping that of the key individuals and relations. You can do this by, for example, analyzing speech acts in front of the body. I also used meeting records of the, for example, final adopting session of such an interpretation. So when the international institution members discuss which proposal makes it into the final draft and which doesn't. And here you can extract the information which individuals were involved, and see whether they just make a statement or whether this statement would then be picked up. And this really helps, or this mapping was very important to do and should be considered in future applications of this framework, because it, for one, helps to really narrow down the number of people. For those studying advocacy in international institutions, you know that sometimes these forums, meetings, whatever, are fully equipped with hundreds of people in the room, often even more, who submitted a written statement. So it would be impossible to really analyze every individual biography here. So this is a good way to narrow it down. And then also it helps us, of course, to identify the ties between individuals, and then serves to pre-structure the process tracing analysis of interpersonal relationships in advocacy in the next steps. Namely, in the second step is then where we analyze whether the international body, the international institution, supports or rejects a certain advocacy claim brought forward by advocates. And here we then get an idea of what is successful advocacy. And I think that it's also important here at the end to check back whether what we find here in our really qualitative analysis of the advocacy claims is similar to what we found as central nodes in the network. Because based on my experience and what you will read in this article, this is not necessarily the case. So sometimes the mapping shows a different picture than when we really look into the process. And so I think this is important before we then come to this third step, where we explore why they have been more successful. And here is really where I advocate for biographical analysis, a method I think is super valuable. And I also refer to a couple of others who have applied this in international relations. I think here this step really goes beyond content analysis and focuses on their professional experience, their previous education, and similarities in the biographies of both advocates and the members of the international institution. And overall, applying this framework, I selected cases which were similar and key characteristics, like the international institution making a decision, the time frame, the norms subject to development, but they varied in the advocates presenting their claims to the institution. And so, therefore, I can assume that the same institution is equally open towards non-state actors based on access rules and composition of members and their preferences, and that the norms face similar challenges and needs for their development, but also that external conditions are similar for the very short time frame between 1999 and 2002. And so, yeah. Here, the network mapping. General comment 12 is on the right to food, 14 on health, and 15 on water. And as you can see, the three networks are largely separated, these advocacy networks, and of course, tied together by the expert members of the committee here in gray. As I already pitched, and please go and read the case studies, there was a lot of effort going in over time, and also maybe a fun fact that one of the key figures on GC12 that is not even that prominent here in this mapping, but becomes very important in the case study, was Asbjørn Eide, who founded the very center I'm now working at, which I didn't even know when I did the research, nor when I submitted it to the Review of International Studies. But not that it means that the review process took so long, but yeah, just that I'm now here, and it's one of the reasons maybe to pitch these case studies. And there you can see again that it's I think important to look back what insights the mapping produced in terms of centrality of certain actors, and what the process tracing and really in-depth analysis of the cases produced. And then we see that the drafting processes of these interpretations of the right to food, health, and water show that advocates really rarely appear in front of the UN as unified actors speaking with one voice. that the organizational affiliation and the relationship the organizations held with the UN did not really matter for those individuals who were successful in bringing in their claims into the drafting process and later on the outcome. And overall, my observations give empirical substance to the argument that individual biographies and personal relations are important to explain successful advocacy. And I think this was largely thanks to this framework, and which can help us then explain why some advocates are more successful than others, although they are not recognized maybe as the authorities in their field, or although they don't possess more financial and human resources than others. So these would all be typical explanations for successful advocacy, but here we don't find them, but instead really can find explanatory power in these interpersonal relationships. So I hope that this framework will be useful and the analysis interesting to read. I think, or I make some suggestions in the conclusion how this framework could travel to other cases of norm development, particularly in international law. And I'm really happy to see it out in the Review of International Studies, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this article. And yeah, thanks for watching this video.